that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to voice my opposition to the proposed amendments in the Higher Education Legislation Amendment, Student Services and Amenities and Other Measures Bill 2009. Schedule 1 of the bill will amend the Higher Education Support Act 2003 to provide for a fee to be imposed by higher education providers from the 1st of July 2009 for a compulsory student services and amenities fee. The fee is to be capped at $250 per student each year, but also will be indexed annually. The bill provides for a new component of the Higher Education Loan Program Help, Services and Amenities Help, SA Help, that will provide eligible students with an option to access a loan of the fee through SA Help. But we have no clear idea what the eligibility criteria will be. The Student Services and Amenities Fee Guidelines will be tabled as a disallowable instrument after the bill has been passed. The bill requires higher education providers to comply with the new Student Services, Amenities, Representation and Advocacy Guidelines. This is clearly the funding of student elections, union officers and salaries, and like the fee guidelines will be tabled after the bill has been passed. Historically, Labor's student amenity fees were clearly compulsory upfront union fees. The Higher Education Support Amendment, the abolition of compulsory upfront student fees, Bill 2005 prevented a higher education provider from requiring a student to be a member of a student association, union or guild, and prevented a compulsory fee for facilities, amenities or services that are not of an academic nature. However, to deal with concerns regarding the impact of voluntary student unionism on regional campuses and on recreational and sporting activities, the Howard government provided transition funding to universities. 44 projects funded by $85 million assisted universities with the construction and maintenance of infrastructure for sporting and recreational facilities. Other projects were funded through the Small Business on Regional Campuses Fund to establish operations for small business on regional campuses and provide services for students. And Regional University Sport Program provided $10 million over 4 years to support regional universities to maintain their sporting programs. The Minister claims that she does not intend this bill to reintroduce compulsory student union fees, but the only political activities expressly prohibited by the legislation are support to political parties and support for election to a Commonwealth, state, territory or local government body. The legislation does not prohibit funding campaigns against legislation and policies or for direct support of trade unions or any other organisation not registered as a political party. I'm sure we'll see some very creative student union activities and cross-subsidisation. The legislation does allow the funds to be used for student representations, in other words, compulsory student unionism by stealth. Students will have no choice but to fund the political agendas of student unions, whether they want to or not. And how will these funds be audited? Where is the departmental monitoring to ensure compliance with the guidelines? At the end of the day, this will be at the Minister's discretion whether any penalty is imposed. Many students believe that the government is attempting to reintroduce compulsory student union fees via the back door, with student unions set to be the beneficiaries of at least part of the revenue raised by the compulsory charge, aided by the lack of compliance requirements. I'm told that University of WA has a $120 fee for students to join the guild. If this fee is compulsory, will universities simply increase their fees immediately to the proposed $250 cap? And on what basis will the university's fees be evaluated? Many students also believe that they should have the freedom to decide how and on what they spend their money, if in fact they have some to spare. They do not want to be forced to pay for services or amenities that they do not use, many of which are already offered by universities. And specifically for the over 130,000 external students, they may never have the opportunity to use any of those facilities, but they will have to pay. What impact will this compulsory fee have on the businesses currently patronised by the students? Students will not be able to afford both the compulsory fee and the community or regional sporting clubs, associations and private support or community services that are provided off campus, the services they are currently paying for. Coming from the regional electorate of Forrest, I know too well the financial and emotional stresses students have to deal with when they leave the security of their southwest family homes and move to Perth, or any other capital city for that matter, to continue with their education, having to take up tertiary courses only available at metropolitan universities. There are extensive additional costs they and their families have to meet compared with their fellow metropolitan-based students. Students from regional areas are already financially and socially disadvantaged when they have to move from their home base to that metro area. Disadvantaged due to the high costs they incur, but also due to the extra emotional stress of simply being away from home and their families, and some students handle this better than others. For young students, this can sometimes be the worst time in their lives to be away from their support base, which is their family. They are basically on their own. Their first year entry to the university is a whole new world, and unlike their city-based counterparts who continue to live at home with meals prepared and often the washing done, and they're in the comfort and support of being with their family. Regional students' lives take on a very busy schedule. They have to find a place to live, a vehicle to get around in, find work to pay the rent, buy food and clothing, the very things that they used to take for granted in the family home. Cooking for themselves is just another hurdle and a challenge. And there's the challenge of managing the social and relationship issues in a major city, as well as finding money for parking if you're a first-year student at some universities, and fuel if you can afford it for the odd trip home to the country. Then the student has to find time to study, and rent prices in Perth have increased dramatically over the past year. Having rents for units has jumped 25%, and house rentals by 17%. And finding a house to share with fellow students, they're definitely in short supply. It's often extremely difficult to find a landlord or real estate office willing to rent to students. Students and their families have to find the 2 weeks' rent in advance, 4 weeks as a bond, as well as connection fees for electricity, gas and telephones. And accommodation at residential colleges can cost approximately $300 a week for each student. And often they see themselves as poor students. And those from regional areas are often poor students because their family have such a battle to get them there in the first place. There's more than just financial reasons compared to their metropolitan-based students. And what this bill intends to do is simply add to the cost of education for students and their families at a time when the economy is in decline. Many first-year students from Forrest have told me they will not use the amenities supposedly being funded by this charge, and they've said they can't afford the fee, and many instances simply will be unable to use the services that the fees are supposed to provide. This is a Labor government $250 tax to fund compulsory student unionism by stealth, imposed irrespective of the student's income, actual use of services, regardless of where they're doing their course, and the students, as I said, studying by correspondence will also pay the $250 tax. And I'd ask what services and facilities will those students actually use. I also know of students in the music performance studies who provide entertainment for the campus at various concerts during the day and in their own time at night as an extension of their studies. And universities already have their clubs, sports and recreation facilities, but not every student uses them, particularly those doing, as I said before, correspondence courses. But for the ones who can afford to or want to use the facilities now, they pay a fee. This is, as it should be, the freedom of choice made by the individual student depending on their circumstances and their willingness to use the facility. Under the Howard government legislation, students on average save $246 a year, and those who chose not to become members of a student union have saved $318 a year. But with the government's current spending sprees and $200 billion borrowings, our students, youth and future generations will also inherit massive Labor debt. And here we have another tax on university students to fund compulsory student union fees. In February, the Minister took submissions from stakeholders on the impact of the current VSU policy. The findings were reported in the impact